Hello, everybody. Welcome to At Home with Holmes. We have an interview in process, and I'm excited because Maddie and I haven't actually sat down without our dad in a bit just to conduct an interview, so this will be fun. And so we have actually, I'm very excited for this, like two really, really special guests. And so Maddie and I recently, and if you follow us on social media, you'll see that we went to the Big Four House rally that was happening in Calgary to kind of showcase Alberta independence. It was a bit of an event where it gave us some information as to why it's important, and it was a really good turnout. And I bumped into these lovely two people, and I was like, oh my gosh, I recognize at least one of them, and that would be Sarina, the lovely lady that you see sitting right there. Exactly. And her and I went to school together, actually, at the kind of quote unquote feminist CGS, Calgary Girls School. And this is her lovely partner and counterpart, Sebastian. And so me and Maddie just wanted to have them on the show. And Maddie, did you want to kind of give 2 cents as to what our motive attention is for that?
Absolutely. Dad usually takes this in our last couple segments, but I got it. We've been posting and meeting a lot of young people at all of the events we've been attending, partly in obligation to other people. We felt it incumbent upon us because as one of the big young faces in the Alberta independence movement involved in the UCP, people often ask, well, where are the young people? Are they involved in Alberta? Are they involved, period? And so when we saw as many young people at the Big Four event that we did, I tried to take pictures with as many of them as I could, of which Sarina, of course, was one of them. We want to go further than just proof of life. We want to show people, okay, what is it that's motivating these people? So if it is so supposedly rare to see young people, we thought every young person that we do get the pleasure of meeting, what is it that brings them? Why are they there? What did they learn? Are they for, against? And so this whole interview is going to be really to understand what led them to that event, essentially, and where some of the values lie and why it was something that came on the radar in the first place. So it's really just to understand the younger population, which everybody's so curious about regarding the whole controversy of Alberta and its independence. Yeah, we'll of course start with Sarina, ladies first, and then we will go to Sebastian.
Okay, Sarina. So I guess that would be the first question, which is what is it about your story and journey that kind of led you to even going to that rally to attend the Alberta Independence Big Four rally? And what are your views thus far on the state of Alberta versus Canada and what led you there?
Right. Okay. So
you can stumble, you can whatever you want. This is your free flow. We're good.
Right. Okay. Basically what happened, I remembered I started getting into politics, I don't know. I'm going to say 2 years ago is when I started to really pay attention, and then more recently since Carney was elected is when I really started to pay attention. I remember the day that I saw that he won and that feeling that I felt of just pure doom.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was actually at the gym and I was sitting in his apartment in his room because I didn't want to go to the gym. And I was texting him and I was like, I bet if you scrolled way far, you would find like, we're fucked. And that's just what I said. And then he kind of was like, we're going to separate. And I remember I just thought like, oh, that's crazy. That's stupid. That would never happen. I'm thinking about what happened with Quebec and how many years they've been trying to separate and how has that been going for them. So I'm like, it's going to be the same with us. And then also I'm still, there's two halves of me. There's the Canadian proud when I see the Canadian Olympics, when I see, you know, the flag, things like that. There's still that, or the song, the anthem, there's still a lot of pride. Then there's the other feeling of not a disgust, but like a letdown, a big disappointment when I see it, because I see it for what it was, and then I see it for what it's become. At first, I didn't want to leave. Like I was very against that. I was like, something will come of this, and it will just all kind of fall back together and be magically fixed. And then as more and more time went on, I realized that wasn't going to be that simple, and that if I wanted to at least keep a part of Canada, that would be Alberta. So I need to fight for my province instead of my country, because I learned also that half the country doesn't even give a shit about us and they just take advantage of us anyways. So why should I really give a shit about them?
So, for what you were mentioning is that you kind of actually did have a bit of a Canadian pride identity, and you were like, I actually am kind of proud to be Canadian for some of the things that you mentioned. And then, so I think my follow-up question is kind of an amalgamation of questions, but you can answer it as short as you want to. When you saw that Mark Carney was getting in, was it just because it was another like liberal prime minister, or was there something about specifically Mark Carney that was bothersome to you? And then another question, kind of adding to that, is when you look at the state of Canada and where it's gone, right? Paint me the picture of kind of like the doomscape of what it is that you feel kind of tanked us and made you more lenient towards going towards independence.
Okay. So I'm gonna go to what I think was the first, which was Carney.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Carney, I remember at first I didn't know a lot about him, same as Pierre. Like I didn't really know a lot about him, and I know from what I know about Pierre, he's definitely not a very good option for Canada either, but he was kind of the best out of what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that Carney, it was what you said, which is that it is again the Liberal government coming in. Had we not learned anything, maybe we give another party a chance. Yeah, and then as well as the more that I learned about him and how he doesn't even really seem to have, I don't think he cares about this country. Actually, I can't say I know, but
You're
very
convinced.
Yeah, he does not give a shit about this country. It's all for personal matters, the things that he is doing. And I've learned this after that he has lots of, like his children live out of the country, all of his estates and everything is out of the country. So even he isn't invested
Right.
in this country.
Mm.
So why should any of us invest? Why should any of us trust? If the only person that is running the country doesn't want to invest in the country, which is just proof that there's nothing good to invest here, if even he doesn't want to.
The second question is basically, what did you learn at the, like, potentially from the Big Four rally or from other informational sources that kind of made you think Alberta's getting taken advantage of?
Well, I learned about just how much we were paying towards the other provinces and to Ontario.
Ottawa,
thank you. Which I remember, like, even when I was younger, I remember learning something about in school, and they said it in like a pride way of like, be Alberta proud, because we're the ones that kind of almost run the show, even though we don't actually run the show. We don't get to make any of the choices. We just get to
pay for it all.
Pay steady, exactly.
Yeah, we fund the welfare state.
Yeah, exactly. But they didn't say it like that. They said it in a way that made it sound nice and pretty.
Yeah.
When I learned about just how much of our money and my money and his money and your money is going away for silly things, like I can't even remember all the things or how much it was, but it was just crazy amounts of money that we are giving up, that amounts of money that I could save, and within 5 years I could have bought like some really nice house or had a really nice car,
Right.
Things like that it just, like, the way our province is, we should be quite wealthy. We should be very financially stable. There shouldn't be people complaining about the groceries. There shouldn't be people complaining about the gas prices.
Definitely.
It shouldn't be a flex that I can buy, a bunch of milk and then I can buy a bunch of eggs and meat all in the same grocery run.
Wow.
Yeah, I learned a lot, and it definitely inspired me to want to go learn more, because when I was there, I'm thinking I know stuff and I'm realizing I don't really know as much as I should or as I want to. So I think more than anything, it was infuriating, but it was infuriating in an inspirational way. where
Yeah,
it
like
made me.
feeling like you can do something about it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, that's very, very fair. Okay, so we'll take it over then to Sebastian.
yeah.
So it's a same question for you, I guess, as in what kind of about your story, and even Sarina, she started to just delve into how she got into politics and then what led her there. So that's a great way if you wanted to take it that way as to what got you to that rally and what is making you as well kind of in favor of Alberta independence.
I guess what got me to the rally would be kind of just seeing the lack of progress and just um, like continued repetition by the country and the leaders in the country, and not even just the leaders, but the people in Canada, just being persistent and going just one direction over and over and over again. When I was like in 2015, 2016, I was either 15, 16 years old. I didn't pay attention to politics that much, and I just started seeing just lots of lies in the media and lots of twisting of narratives, and that's what got me engaged. And I pay attention more to American politics, like to be completely honest.
Of
And
course.
then I would see the same things happening here in Canada, but in a different way. By paying attention to some of these countries, you could kind of see what was coming here to Canada.
Right.
So
Yep.
then, when we elected Trudeau, everybody was kind of happy, and by then, I didn't really pay attention to the state of Canadian politics as much as I should have been. But I was just, everybody was tired apparently, and I didn't understand why. When I thought the life was pretty good here when Stephen Harper was, right? But people wanted change, so I was like, okay, I guess change is not bad, and
Mm.
that's like the same word that we've been using for years now. That change is good and change is happening, and it's been the same party pushing the same ideas and not really getting us anywhere. So
Which is the irony of it.
yeah, that's the irony. That's the funniest part. So then Trudeau gets elected, and then he runs again and gets more power, and then he just keeps being reelected. And then I'm like, wow, like we're not going to do anything different. And then I saw the division from each province, everybody wanting different things. With Quebec, always kind of doing the things Quebec does, and Alberta just feeling more disconnected from the rest of the country, and then learning how underrepresented we were as a province, or all the other provinces here in the West are. I realized I'm like, this country's fracturing. And after we elected Carney, I was like, if we elect the Liberals one more time, this country's going to fall apart. And I think Alberta's going to separate. And I didn't really know that there was like a movement about this
Mm.
on the internet and out there in the real world, which is what matters the most. And that's what made me realize is that we're Canadians don't care. They complain about the problems, but they don't seem to understand why they're happening. And
Mm.
it seems that Albertans do. And if the country's so divided and there's no sense of identity, then it's going to fracture. So that realization of Carney being elected was what made me realize that this is going to happen.
Okay, so there's a bit of a contrast there. So this question can kind of go towards both of you because even though Sebastian, you saw the Canadian identity, you kind of saw it from almost the bird's eye view. You saw that whatever the Canadian identity is according to each province, it's clearly not the same anymore. So you saw
Yeah.
this overall higher disunity where Sarina, you experienced it on a personal level going, oh, okay, I am feeling this disunity. So do neither of you guys feel guilty, or because the rhetoric that's being put out there, even at people our age, is that, well, we're traitors to Canada. So do either of you feel like there's this traitor dynamic? Why or why not?
I would say no. I don't feel guilty. The only times I feel guilty is there are people that are close to me personally that don't have any idea that I'm a part of this. And so I think that maybe I don't feel guilty for this. I feel maybe guilty that if they knew, they would think that I was probably betraying Canada. But overall, no, I don't feel guilty because at the end of the day, um, Albertans have been giving so much for so long, and we are literally getting like shoved under the bus. Like nobody cares. Nobody really, we don't get much acknowledgement. There's no even like thanks to Alberta that we can do these things, we can do those things. None of that. Honestly, from what I hear, a lot of other provinces talk down to Albertans and they say that we're just kind of country bumpkin. So we're not. But we're always riding horses and cowboys and cowgirls. So it's like these people don't even know how much, Albertans don't even know how much we're doing for the rest of the country, but the rest of the country doesn't even know how much we're doing for them. So why should I care? It sounds heartless, but why should I care about all of them, not specifically the human beings, but all
Yeah.
when they don't care about us, what we're doing, and we're suffering when logically there is no reason that we should be. And so that's why I don't feel guilt. I feel that it's just.
I think people shouldn't feel guilty for trying to preserve something, you know? In my opinion, I think the eastern part of Canada has been eroding what it means to be Canadian. And, you know, if you don't do anything about it, then it will erode. So I think it's fair and just to want to do that. And especially kind of building off Sarina's point that we're underrepresented, right? And we actually fund a lot of the things that happen here in this country. And if we're not even given the opportunity to be represented fairly, and if there's not even that consideration to Albertans, then like, what is the point, you know?
It's sort of like doing a group project in school.
Oh my God, I love this.
Work. Yeah. And then they all get to stand on the stage and read all of your notes and act like they did it, and they all get the good grade because you did all the work.
That's the best way to put it, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
That was awesome.
That's funny. The way you kind of worded it, and I guess, you know, if we're going to be labeled as traitors regardless, because there's going to be those people out there and the people that think we're betraying a Canadian identity. If we have a choice between betraying something, there's betraying Canada, but even then, as Sebastian alluded to, can we agree on what Canada even means anymore? The likelihood is not. Or there's betraying a prosperous future. And most people can agree on what a prosperous future looks like. And that's, you know, being able to have a house, being able to run a family and afford those basic, maybe have a nice car. Not
you shouldn't be flexing about, like
being able to
grocery
buy
runs and
your
being able to actually afford things.
Exactly. And so I'd rather betray, if I have to be a traitor, I'd rather betray something that is an illusionary, ambiguous concept of what a Canadian is versus betraying my potential livelihood, which can lead to a better identity, whatever that means on the grand scale. So that was an interesting concept. And it kind of goes with what Eva Chipiuk was one of the lawyers. She's the female lawyer that spoke at the big event. She always talks about democracy. And I feel, you know, people that really are tied to the Canadian identity, I remember feeling that way in school because they give you social studies textbooks and they say Canada is so great because our RCMP and we're bilingual and we have maple syrup.
And hockey.
And so but, you know, as a young kid, I'm like, yeah, that sounds, you know, this big multicultural pot sounds like a good thing. So why shouldn't, of course we have a Canadian identity, and they made us write essays on it in school. And so, but looking at all of the arguments now, what people are actually tied to is the idea of a democratic society. People think Canada's very democratic and that's what we should be preserving. And if that really is the case, then I think Alberta pursuing its democratic rights and then pursuing a bit more autonomy, or not even just representation, because we don't have equal representation,
is anything but treacherous.
It is anything but treacherous. We are pursuing the Canadian identity, our Canadian roots, which is what, you know, the Charter, even though we have our contentions with the Charter, what it was founded on, and the idea taken from the U.S. Constitution was civic engagement and civil rights. And so us pursuing this movement is pursuing the Canadian identity, what everybody thought it was anyway, what people still think it is. That kind of, I've never really thought of it like that until you guys kind of painted that picture, because it isn't really traitorous, this movement. But I guess you would only learn that by listening to people like you and then realizing, oh, these young adults aren't traitors, and here's why.
Well, yeah, even Sebastian, like you mentioned, like it's not traitorous, as Maddie's also alluding to want to preserve something. And I think, so Sebastian, you said, and it's similar to what you've been alluding to here, is that Canada, what it is now, Alberta, it's almost like Alberta is acting more in the interest of what the old Canadian national identity used to be, or at least what was something to be proud of now versus the rest of the provinces in our country. So I just wanted to see if you wanted to speak a bit more to that as to how Alberta is actually preserving that more than even the rest of Canada is.
I think lately there's like a lot of pride when it comes to like when you criticize Canada or what being Canadian is, that kind of stops people from, accepting that criticism. So, like you often hear like, oh, at least we're not Americans, or at least this, but it's like without that comparison,
Free healthcare.
Yeah.
and then like talking like, oh, being Canadian is hockey and maple syrup and all these things, but like, it just, to me, it sounds more like propaganda and not more like about the values. And I feel like that's what matters most. And I think that's what Alberta, and with our premier, Daniel Smith, that's what Alberta talks about more. And I think we need to talk about those things more. And it's the values and what it means to be Canadian, not just these symbols that may be important or like attributes, but what makes Canadian and what qualities, morals, that sort of stuff. Is that what you're referring to?
No, exactly. I think that the thing that hit home a lot was exactly what you're saying, which is Alberta. I've been saying, even when people have been asking Maddie and I what we think about Alberta independence and all that, I personally think that it's been one of the best thought experiments of our generation, at least, because now we're actually getting into the nitty-gritties of what does a successful country look like. And I don't think a lot of kids in school actually get asked that question. I know I sure didn't.
If we did, it was always without context, because I remember in CGS they had us do, I don't know if it was the Go Girls class or Community Connections.
Oh, maybe.
They had us, if you could make a utopia government, what would you make? And so they're asking all of right, and then we had to draw these diagrams. How would the town layout be? As if we had any context. And then we were I wrote some of the things, I'm like, we were just basically creating 1984 versions. They just sound more innocent because it's coming from women.
Well, like, it's crazy because in those thought experiments, you have a bunch of kids trying to basically draw out in crayon what a successful country would look like, but it's so much more deep than I could have ever imagined. And even like taking a look at just the people that were speaking at the Big Four rally, and even just their document that they wrote, the Value of Freedom document, it's going in trying to actually paint a fiscal plan. And so there's all of these considerations that you have to think of going in. And then also it's like, but I think the number one thing that I think resonated from what you and Sarina were bringing up in our chat when we were in person was the fact that you do need to think, though, what are your values going to be going into this? And then, so I think that for Canada, we've lost a lot of what those values are. I guess my sort of follow-up question would be, or I guess sort of like a prompting for your brain to pick apart, is like, our multiculturalism is something that is quite shoved down our throats as a thing that is us supposed to be proud of. And don't get me wrong, like, it is something to be proud of, but it's extremely complicated, especially when you're losing those sorts of values of what a national identity is supposed to look like. Because even, and I'll just give my little context even from this morning, me, Maddie, and my brother, and Kyle were at the kitchen table, and we were already just having kind of like a thought experiment on what would it look like if you were actually trying to make sure that maybe those who have certain religious ideations that you don't necessarily want to see in your country, how do you prevent that? Because you're saying that, well, you don't want to harm people, right? That's one thing that most new countries establish on the onset is don't do fellow harm to your fellow man. But then at the same time, a lot of countries, Canada being one of them, we do have a little thing that says you have the freedom of religion, right? And so that's where it kind of can get a little bit contradictory because it depends on, well, what kind of aspect of the religion are we talking about here, right?
Satanism is a religion.
Yeah, right. Satanism is a religion. These are the things where it's like, well, whoa. Like, we have to get down to, well, how do we show what, like, you can't just basically be a blanket slate. Like, you can't be everything and nothing. Otherwise, you are nothing. Like, you have to have something to stand on. You can't just try and just, I don't know, like, put your hands out everywhere. It's like you have to at least grab something. And I think that the thing that we kind of came to in some sort of conclusionary kind of consensus a little bit as we were having that discussion at the kitchen table was basically like, if someone at least can be held accountable to the fact that they know what it is that we're looking for, like, hey, you can't harm people, or hey, you have been educated on our history as Canadians and then leading up into how maybe we become an independent country, so now you know how Alberta came to be this thing, right? And now if we have the value set in place of like, okay, maybe we want them to know this certain aspect of our culture.
Alberta, if we get independence, we have to go. The next step after the referendum is negotiations. That's mandatory. And then while negotiations are going on, I'm hoping that, there will be an Alberta Constitutional Convention, because now we need to form a new constitution. I'm hoping we are proactive and we go after that prior to the end of negotiations, because I believe negotiations will fail. It's just a matter of when. Then when that happens, we need to have our own constitution in place. And if we were in charge of our immigration, people coming in would have to read the Alberta Constitution. And then we would need some sort of proof of evidence that they read our Alberta Constitution, because then it has all of the values that we as a new nation value.
Yeah, because then I thought to myself that if someone goes against any of that, like maybe they are like, yeah, but I have freedom of religion, so I'm just gonna, beat my wife or whatever the heck. It's like, no, because we made it in place where when you came in on the onset, you had to read this thing that says this is what we value and this is what we expect from you. And so the minute that you do something wrong, we can literally refer back to it, kind of like, I don't know, someone in school, and just be like, hold on now, you read all the work, why are you failing? What's going on here? To kind of play off Sarina's analogy. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
You want to go first?
No, you go.
I think, in a sense, like, because it's kind of delicate when you talk about things like this, because it's like there have been times in history where governments have overstepped and, I guess, entrenched people's rights, to practice their religion. So if the wrong person to get in power, they can use that power to use that for evil. Because you can't have freedom, but you can't have total freedom and then preserve existing values. And like, I think the problem with like letting in all these different cultures and religions, and like even as an immigrant, like you have to let people in that have common values and morals and ideologies, because if you don't, then if you have the existing value, which is to preserve freedom, and then you let like the ideology or beliefs the end justifies the means, like you guys said, or it doesn't matter if you lie, it's just, or how you get there, it just matters that you do. Those are two opposing ideas, and they can't coexist. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be some way to preserve that, and I think the way would be to only let ideologies that are similar in some sense, that at the core values, you don't have to agree with everything, but the core values are the same. Because if you don't have those core values, you can't have friendships, you can't have relationships, right? You can't have a community, and
Can't mingle.
you can't have a country. That's what builds an identity, is core values. So if we don't have core principles, then you can't really have a conversation like we're having, without feeling fear of judgment, or that, that you're going to be seen as something else. Because those are the reasons that there have been like tribes or countries, right? That's why those are borders. And I think that's what the problem is with Canada right now, is that they're eroding all definitions and just the structure of what it means to be Canadian. So if we need to do the opposite here in Alberta, and I don't know what that looks like, but there needs to be more control on what's allowed here and who's allowed here, because we can't just let anybody in.
A question I'm curious about, because bringing this up, talking about values, because me and MayCee are involved in the UCP and you guys met our MLA just the other day, people assume, again, because you're in the UCP or if you're in the NDP or the Liberals, they immediately assume all of your values and they know your classification. As you're talking, and from my own experience, I know it's not that dichotomous, but I want to know your guys' perspective, because you're young, you're immediately assumed by the older generation to be more tendent towards Liberals, NDPs. What are your guys' ideas on the whole party, their values? Do you identify with one? Do you prefer to stay neither? And where is that in your guys' brain? Let's start with Sarina.
I think that I see where the older generations maybe get the idea that people like us you're saying like that we're more likely to lean liberal, right? I think that stems from liberals being, or certain liberals, very loud and very attention grabbing, whereas I see for a lot of the part conservatives, and it's not every one person is the same, right?
Yeah.
But overall it seems that the conservatives are more collected, more quiet to the back. Like this movement itself, I hear liberals all the time saying, oh, that's not going to be a thing. They bring it up like it's this casual thing. Meanwhile, there's this whole other almost world going on where this is actually a big thing happening, and they're not even aware of it. I definitely, like, before I really got into things, I definitely identified with liberal. I think it wasn't like a thought, but I think I just assumed that everybody was a part of a group, that everyone automatically, depending on your values, were a part of a group. And then I had a very misguided understanding of what the different groups stood for. And so, especially when you're on the liberal side, the conservative, I was thinking like 1950s, like that's what the conservatives are wanting, right? Which is not. But that's what I was thinking. And so I think that also is where it comes from, that I think liberal is kind of more modern, maybe, because of all the ideologies that they carry now, or things that have come up in the past 20 years. And in the years that we were growing up, these are things that became bigger and bigger and bigger deals. Like LGBT is a huge one that became kind of like something that was just maybe that kind of happened to, like, now it's a huge deal. There's a month, there's all these things. So I always thought like, yeah, I'm liberal. And then now I definitely do identify as conservative. I have a lot of takes that I would say maybe definitely at one point were liberal, even now. But
before we get your thoughts, Sebastian, I just wanted to kind of add some additional thoughts to that, because you said that, like, right now there's some things even in your zeitgeist and in your ethos that are still sort of could be classified as liberal in thinking, right? That you're like, I still have like some tendencies, but you're like, majority wise, I think I might lean more towards conservative, right? But it was like what you and Sebastian were both alluding to is what you said about the idea of, I felt like no matter what, you were going to get categorized. Like, no matter what, there was a party for you, right? And during your time from CGS onward, you would have thought, okay, so I guess I'm liberal, right? And I like the fact that you added that it's okay, it's clearly more modern. I like to see it as like they're the trendsetters. And actually, this is like one of the this is one of the classic things that people do say about when they're trying to differentiate, is like what Sebastian said, change isn't a bad thing, right? Like, people want change. They've been saying that's necessary, right?
Oh, and
The
Sebastian even alluded to that earlier because when he said, before Trudeau got in, things were okay during Stephen Harper, supposedly, but, things were staying the same. There wasn't much change. And so the
exactly.
conservatives, like Sarina's idea of the 1950s, because conservatives got this image for not changing.
Well, it's in the name. Like conserve means like to
Yes,
conserve
right.
something means to kind of take a look at something, go like, maybe we don't need to fix what's not broken, right? It's like it's a bit of the blessing and curse of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that can be a blessing and curse. And that's where the liberals, their sales pitch is kind of trendy and is kind of catchy because it does appeal to the young mind, because the young mind is already in a constant state of change, right? Because your entire life is trying to figure out who you want to be. So that's constantly running in your brain and it's changing. And then you're already on your way to trying to figure out, what do I want to do for my career? What do I want to do? Like, do I want a family? Okay, where do I want to have this family? And like all of these things are happening. And it's not like older generations aren't thinking this through, but they have more experience with just living on the planet physically that they're like, okay, I have a funny idea of what my system is, whereas we're in the middle of trying to build it. And so I think that's why the trendiness of the liberal identity, and as you said, the things like the LGBTQ, for example, they come up and they're fresh and they're kind of like, I guess, as Sebastian was alluding to, though, a part of it is propaganda because it can create a sort of divisiveness. And so I think that plays into my question and kind of how Sebastian, like, if you're, please add to this when you want to, but it does kind of create a bit of a feeling of isolation and divisiveness the minute that you kind of stray away from one of them and go towards maybe the one that's in the background. And I feel like now this is like, I know that I've heard this before from our generation, is that apparently, and I don't know like how I see it, just because when you're on social media, it's hard not to see the divisiveness, like really truly in your face. But just on a regular, like Sarina was talking about, when you're with individual people, it's very nuanced. And I feel like the reason why some of our generation doesn't even like party politics and doesn't even want to get involved in politics, or just doesn't like it, the party system at all, is because, as Sarina was saying, there's aspects of me that would probably align with the idea of change and liberal and follow up on what's going on. And, like, should we be considering how we're, I guess, what was deemed emotional damage, right, for children? It's like, that's something that you can start to think about and you're like, oh shit, right? But there's another part of me that's like, no, I'm pretty sure there's only two genders. All of, like, there's things that I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. And so I feel like there is that nuance of knowing that there's a bit of both inside of us. And that's why I think the system, personally, I would align with some of those people where it's like, I get really tired of the party dynamics. Because for me personally, I'm like, I mean, you can have both within you and at different fluctuations in your life. So what are your thoughts on that?
What makes a country is that there's a lot of people with like similar ideas that come together, but those ideas are similar enough where you can have a conversation and talk. But what has happened, in my opinion, is that the left has such a grip on everything that they control a majority of the news. They control the narrative, I would argue, and they even control like speech in social settings, so that you don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that's the narrative that they've built, that if you say the wrong thing, you're going to get canceled. And I think that's why people don't like talking about things, right? It's taboo to talk about politics. But in my opinion, I think you should be able to talk about politics, especially if you're in a country with people that think the same things as you, right? Because if you don't talk about these things, when are you supposed to talk about them? And, when is it okay to do that?
Do you like the idea of this sort of party dynamic in the first place when it comes to the like idea of on the individual versus on the governmental? Because as to play into the bigger picture of Alberta becoming potentially its own country and such, right? It's like, what are some of the mistakes that we are seeing in Canada and with the two-party system that we don't want to be repeating when we come into Alberta, potentially our own country?
I don't know what the solution would be to that.
I think it would be nice to have parties. I think something I wanted to like jump in and say is I think a lot of people say that, oh, they don't want to get involved, they don't like to get involved. And I think, well, a lot of people will say these things and then are, without even realizing, very much part of a party,
Mm.
because both sides are so opposite right now. Like with liberal, I've learned it's very much you are with us or you are against us.
Mm.
So if they and their main ideologies, if I don't agree with those things, then I'm automatically, even they automatically put me into the group of the conservative. And so I think to have your own country, obviously there can be opposing parties, but I think the biggest problem right now is that the parties are very, very different. They want very different things, especially going on like migration and like LGBT. Like these things are very extreme on either end, where they're very different, where we are saying, we need to protect and conserve Canada, and that doesn't mean don't ever let anybody else into the country ever again. But that means letting people in that care about this country, that want to add to this country, that want to bring businesses, that want to bring economic growth to this country, that want to bring respect, bring, actually bring something to the country. Whereas a lot of these people, they don't. They want to bring what this country gives them and gives it back home. They go and they only speak their own language and they only hang out with their own groups, and a lot of them are very different. That's a problem. And then there's the people that, like, the liberal is like saying that is racist, and then there's the conservative that is saying, well, it doesn't have anything to do with the skin color or any of that. It has to do with, we need to let people into this country that care, that want to be here, and that want to be here to make Canada better. And then there's also the LGBT, which is like also very extreme, because it's, we are like, there's a girl and there's a boy, you are the way you are. And them, it's very different. They want to, let our children stop puberty. They want to send you to jail for not letting your child, take hormone therapy and, get surgeries done before they're even 18 years old, which even 18, in my opinion, is too young, because
Mm-hmm.
I brought up the tattoos that I got when I was 18, and look at me, I don't want them anymore. So, like, how do I get to make such a permanent decision? And so I think that's honestly the problem.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I think what I was trying to say earlier is that first of all, I've only known the like two-party system. I think that's what almost every country goes to, and I think because like that's what the spectrum is. It's left or right. It's just it matters like how far those ideas are, and that's what created the country in the first place. So,
Yeah.
in my opinion, I don't think like a two-party system is that bad, so long as like the main values are the same. But if you have a two-party system, and I think that's what happened in Canada, and I think the mistake that happened here is that the left has kept on pushing towards progress and continue to push towards progress without a goal. In my opinion, that once you reach something, then it's like, okay, how much further do we take it? So I think the left did good things, like for example, pushing for equal rights for like gay and marriage and all that stuff. But then after it started to turn into like the LGBTQT and then LGBTQTI plus, and then all these gender stuff on like the narrative. And I think that's what the problem is with the current system. The problem is that the left has had too much control over the narrative, and that conservatives are too quiet. That conservatives don't want to say anything, and they just want to sit at the back. But that's what, in my opinion, has caused this problem. So I don't really agree with the idea that the two-party system is bad, so long as people are active in their community and in their country, province, whatever you want to call it.
I think that's honestly brilliant, because I'm like, I don't necessarily disapprove of the two-party system, but it was something that came to mind as to why some young people just don't want to get involved at all, because they're like, I just don't want to get there. But as Sarina was alluding to, sometimes you're going to get forced into a camp either way.
I think, yeah,
And then
people feel like they have to belong somewhere, especially young people. People always talk about you need to belong, you want to fit in. And so you're desperate to figure out, okay, where am I most likely to fit in? And so whether it's from peer pressure or just yourself jumping in, most of the time both, we kind of put ourselves in a category prematurely.
Yeah, and even the cliques in school that were like, I don't want to be a part of a clique, became a clique. Like,
yeah,
like even you not wanting to be categorized, you still categorized yourself.
Yeah, all in this attempt to identify yourself as something. But kind of listening to Sebastian, you're talking about core values. And core values, to me, transcends your labels, because, again, we have on other podcasts, we've had Morgan on. Morgan is gay. He identifies as communist, and yet core values are absolute. He's involved. We could have love that man. And so despite all the labels that people plaster themselves, because even what you just said, Sebastian, conservative in Canada now does not mean conservative in the United States, and then that depends.
Or even conservative a couple of years ago in Canada, right?
Exactly. And so I feel all these labels, they change, but core values, they don't. You can't invent a core value, and that's something that C.S. Lewis talked about too. People try, and in the left, and I don't even want to say necessarily on the politically left, because, we've seen other people do this too, but people try and invent a new value as if the human condition has changed, and it hasn't. And so that's one thing that, as Sebastian alluded to, the contradictory values, and I think the youth and our generation, they're seeing it. I think they're seeing these contradictions with the left and right, the left amongst themselves, the right amongst themselves, because both parties have contradictions amongst their own group. And then same with religions. Some youth are turned off of religion because they see some contradictions, and they think, okay, well then I just won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because I don't want to contradict myself like everybody else is. And yet they don't then define their values, because they've seen all of the definitions that have been set in front of them and gone, well, those are dumb definitions.
I think people say they don't want to put themselves in a party or on a side, and I think a lot of those people, without even realizing, they are already on a side. I think there's a problem in Canada where a lot of people will just assume that you are on their side, like liberal. I've had so many people just bluntly say things to me that are very liberal takes, just assuming that I agree with them. And I also kind of think that's a problem, because then I know that it is scary to just outwardly disagree. I think it's more scary to be conservative than it is to be liberal. I think it's safer to be liberal. I think you're more likely to find people like you out in the wild, liberal for some reason. Even though I know there are so many conservatives, I find myself constantly running into all the liberals. And so I feel like for a lot of youth, it's scary to even try to, they don't even think to do their own research, do their own anything, because it's scary, because they know what kind of treatment they'll get if they don't abide by that party. And so I think in Alberta, if we became our own place, I think I would want like that monitored, as well as like that. I don't want such a divide that it's scary to, say an opinion, or, you go to work for me and that I know that I can't say anything, because I know what kind of environment I work. I know my management. I know all these things, and I know that likely I would get in trouble for things if I said them at work. And so I don't want that kind of mindset.
I think actually I would argue a lot of people don't know what they believe in. And going back to people, just how you said, like the people that didn't want to be part of a group end up being part of a group. And I think those things happen because like that's natural to humans. You want to be part of a community and a tribe. And if you control the narrative and you push everything and what's allowed to be said and what ideas are okay, then people are going to be they're going to feel scared, and especially if one of the main narratives is like being canceled, and that's one idea that's been pushed by the left. So this is all you see on social media. This is all you hear about in person. So of course people are going to be scared, and they're not going to want to talk. So the people on the right are then scared because the left seems like they're a majority, and in my opinion, in Canada they are, except with the exceptions of certain provinces. But the reason people feel scared and the people can't agree on anything is because the left keeps on going further and further left. I would say, like, even at one point I was liberal, like prior all of this, like prior 2016. But I feel like my ideas haven't changed. I feel like my ideas have stayed the same. But what it means to be liberal or what it means to be conservative are so different now that there's not going to be any common ground between people. And you can even see it in their own groups where, like, I don't know if you guys know the term like turf, like,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
People within the left will get canceled for not accepting everything. So I think the left, the way it's going, it's destructive. And if it keeps going the way that it is, people are going to continue to feel this way. People won't want to engage into like civil discussion and to know what's going on because they're just scared. And fear, in my opinion, is what controls the narrative now. And even now, before coming on this podcast, I was feeling a little scared. I was like, oh man, like I hope my employers never see this, like, because what if I say something and then I could get canceled? And that's like a very real thing here in Canada, and I would say in the West.
And I think that's actually a part of I don't think that is the part of the propaganda, is the fear to speak up against the popular narrative.
I don't think you could even refer to the left as liberals anymore. I think the left now they're communists because those ideas are very like,
if you're
against us, and like you're against something, then you're against us, and like those are beliefs that are found in communism, is that if you don't accept everything, then you're against the commune, so you're not a comrade, and you're against the whole movement. And I think what's happening in Canada is that we're going towards communism. Everything that's going on right now, you would find it in like previous communist countries or even in current communist countries that is controlling the narratives and controlling what you're allowed to think. And eventually you get so far left that that's all there is. And I think that's why the conservatives are not really conservatives. It's because in order to meet the people on the left, you got to go, closer to the left. So if they keep going closer to the left, I believe that if nothing happens here in Canada, then the conservatives one day, they're not really going to be conservatives. They're just going to be liberals. Nothing's being conserved because you can't conserve anything because everybody's scared.
Damn. That was deep. I was like, oh.
Well, I mean, on that note, I want to thank you both because I have heard that sentiment from other young people. There are youth in universities, and they share the sentiments. So even if we don't agree on everything, because it's not like I've gotten to have one-on-ones with all of these young people, but they don't believe Canada is going in a good direction. They're fearful of their future, but as much as they're fearful of their future, the immediate fear of the consequences for sharing that fear for their future, they're trying to do it as politely and quietly as they can.
Like a Canadian. There you go. There's the Canadian identity. Right.
I mean, isn't that sad though? I mean, youth don't feel like they can fight for their future anymore because they're going to get ostracized for fighting for their future. Yeah. They're going to get labeled, they're going to get harassed, and there are many of those young people on the universities that have said, "Yeah, I support you girls, but I have to be careful because of my job or my schooling." And so I appreciate both of you taking the time to come on this podcast with us and allow us to share a bit of your story and your thoughts, because the goal of this is to encourage other young people to step past the propaganda, step past the fear. Because funny enough, I mean, in order to progress, you have to be a little bit outstanding. You have to put yourself out there in an uncomfortable position, because that is where you have been pushed. It's not necessarily that you step there, like Sebastian, you just said, the conservatives and all the people just wanting to live their lives and the young people wanting to make a living, they just kind of stood still. But then the whole world came at you and basically said, okay, move or else. And so I appreciate you guys coming on and delivering your guys' message, because I believe it is going to help some other people realize they're not isolated. And that was the one thing that the trucker movement did, you know, for everybody during COVID, is because so many Canadians thought, I'm alone and I'm scared of all this COVID propaganda, but I don't know what to do with it. And then the truckers came out and were protesting, and people went, oh my gosh, I'm not insane. And so I believe you guys are a breath of fresh air to, and will be to, other youth that are feeling that same trepidation, because they're surrounded by the environments that they are and the economic conditions that they are. So if you guys have any last finishing thoughts regarding that, a message that you want to send out, or some big key points regarding your journey that you think would help other people, now is the time.
I think just people need to be willing to have conversations that make others uncomfortable. And I think we have to like dismantle this communist narrative that's being pushed around, because I've never seen so much people be open and about being communist. And I feel you have to push back by talking to your neighbor and to your friends, even if they're uncomfortable. You know, be willing to share the news and speak up against being canceled, because like this conditioning that people fear, the fear of speaking up, that's very similar to what happens in a country that's about to fall into communism. Is that the narrative is being controlled. This has been instilled in Canadians, I believe, for years, and this is why people now are afraid to say anything. And if we let this happen, you know, when you're on the bus, you're afraid to say something out loud. If you're afraid to have a conversation up in the open because of fears of being controversial, then you're just as much a part of the problem. So you need to use your voice wherever you are. Even if you're having a simple conversation at the park, if you don't say anything, then nothing's ever going to happen.
And what I would say is that be brave. There is hope of you know, like what he says, when you can go, if you're, don't be afraid to speak your mind, to talk to people, to try to inform people, because I was once one of those people that people would have been afraid of, and somebody wasn't afraid of it, and they helped me see the light. And you know what? I believe that there are lots of people out there that would see the light if the light was brought to them the right way. And so we're all scared, but we're all fighting for our future. And you know, it needs to. It's one scary moment, or it's 20 years down the line of regret.
Well said. MayCee, do you have any closing thoughts?
If I have closing thoughts, I'll just go on for another hour. I don't know if it's a smart thing to make me do any closing thoughts. I would just say, like, to even add to the communism remark and kind of just, you know, that battle against that, I would actually even say it's more of like a battle of totalitarianism, because even you could see in Nazi Germany, that was quote unquote labeled fascism, but they did the same thing of burning books, right? And having neighbors spy on each other so that way they could tattletale. So it's like when you have a sort of totalitarian type of entity, whether it's the state, right, or they're doing it for the sake of the commune or for the sake of the party or whatever, it's like that's when I would agree that we need to actually take a look and go like, whoa, like the minute that like shame in a country is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have that sort of like I guess wanting to question your ideas and wanting to question your ethos and wanting to have that ability to kind of like go like, oh, can I like actually take a step back and go like, is what I'm thinking the right thing to be doing? Like, as in basically with what you were saying with the LGBTQ, it's like, how far do we take this, right? It's like, how far do I let my ideas go? So there's nothing wrong with shame in that respect. And I wouldn't even necessarily call it like that. It's more like just like an introspection of thought, right? That's fine. But when it gets to a point where other people are feeling like they can't, like they're gonna get either arrested or they're gonna get like canceled, or they can't just have a basic human being conversation one-on-one, and like they have a fear of like 1984 Big Brother on their shoulders looking at them, then you know that something is completely and utterly amiss. So that would be kind of my closing remarks as well, is just to repeat off of what Sarina and Sebastian had to say.
Well, yeah, it kind of comes around to the very beginning. You know, we were asking, why are you for Alberta independence? Both of you guys said you saw where Canada was going. What Canada was is not what it is. And I guess the biggest telltale of that is the censorship. We can't have dialogue anymore. And if anybody watching this, any young person, if you have a smidge of fear when conversing with your peers or with your teachers, your society is broken. And that is how you know you need to help us reform the values and re-add the civility back into it. Censoring is not civil, and calling people racist and traitors when they offend you, it's not civil, and that's not what a society is built upon. And so you guys really emphasize that well, and hopefully other people can start reevaluating their own values and defining it, because as Sebastian said, some people I think are a bit lost. Thank you guys very, very, very much for coming on. Hopefully, maybe we can have you on again in the future. We appreciate it. Without further ado, this has been At Home with Holmes.